Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and just today Blizzard recently released 8 more hero talent trees for us to take a look at. Hero talents are going to be new ways for our characters to augment themselves going forward as we level into the next expansion of The War Within, with new ways to add a little bit extra flavor to our classes, with every single spec getting access to 2 new hero specs which function kind of like a sub-spec. And today we got 8 of them. 2 of them are going to be for Paladin, 1 for Evoker, 1 for Rogue, a Warlock, a Druid, as well as a Warrior, which is quite a lot for us to get into, but I want to dive into this as soon as possible. All of these hero talents are still a work in progress and are subject to change. Blizzard is looking for feedback on the hero talents early in order to start making changes before the War Within Alpha is released, which should actually be coming out sometime soon. If we were to go by the most recent roadmap, should be somewhere between March or April. So for today's video, I wanted to go over all of those 8 hero talents, give you guys some of my first early impressions, and let you know some of the things that I do like and things that I don't like when it comes to the basic design. And I encourage all of you to share your thoughts in the comments down below, just to give Blizzard as much feedback as possible. It's a long one, so I added chapters into this video, so feel free to skip around to whatever classes you are the most interested in. But right before that, most of you guys watching the War Within videos on this channel are still not subscribed, so if you want to get more regular War Within updates, be sure to hit the button below, and let's get into the video. So the first one we have is the Druid for Chosen of Elune, or rather, Elune's Chosen. This is a hero talent that is shared between the Balance and Guardian Druids and will revolve around mostly the arcane side of both of these playstyles, starting off with an ability called Boundless Moonlight, where for Balance, full moon calls down 2 minor moons that will deal astral damage and generate additional resources. For Guardian Druids, Lunar Beam will cause you to leech life equal to 10% of all damage you deal to enemies within your Lunar Beam, which basically grants you 10% leech as long as enemies are within that beam. For both specializations, you will also get Fury of Elune for Balance and Guardian will now end with a flash of energy, blasting nearby enemies with astral damage. I do wonder if this means that Fury of Elune will eventually be on the Guardian Druid talent tree at some point, or it's just talking about one of the Fury of Elunes that you can proc from within the hero talent tree specifically. On the left-hand side, we start off with Moon Guardian, where for Balance, Moonfire and Starfire generate additional astral power, but for Guardians, the automatic Moonfires from Galactic Guardian will generate additional rage. Further down, we have Lunar Amplification, where each non-arcane damage and ability you use will increase the damage of your next arcane ability by 3%, stacking up to 3 times. So they actually, I think, reduced the amplification as well as the stacks of the Lunar Amplification ability. Further down, we have a choice node with Stellar Command. For Balance, it'll increase the damage of Full Moon by a flat amount. For Guardian, increase the damage of Lunar Beam by 30%, and for both specs, it'll increase the damage of Fury of Elune by 15%. Or Lunar Calling, where Starfire deals 40% increased damage to its primary target, but no longer triggers a solar eclipse. But for Guardian, Thrash will now deal arcane damage, and his damage is increased by 12%, so that Thrash arcane damage, combined together with Lunar Amplification, could actually be, I think, an interesting AoE setup. In the middle row, we have Lunar Insight, so Moonfire will deal 10% more damage, which is pretty good on its own. Atmospheric Exposure. Enemies damaged by Full Moon, Fury of Elune, or Lunar Beam take more damage from you for 6 seconds, which is decent. Then we got a choice node of the Light of Elune. Moonfire damage has a chance to call down Fury of Elune to follow your target for 3 seconds and generate astral power or rage. So maybe that's where they are adding Fury of Elune into the Guardian rotation. It's a choice between Astral Insight Incarnation. Chosen of Elune Incarnation, Guardian of Ursak, increase arcane damage from spells and abilities by 10% while active. Convoke the Spirit's duration and number of spell increase is increased by 25%, so they actually really want you to tie in Convoke as part of this arcane playstyle. Right hand side grants you Glisten and Firm. Bear Form and Moonkin Form reduces arcane damage taken by 6% and all other magic damage taken by 3%, which is a nice bit of defense. But then we have a choice of Moondust or Elune's Grace. With Moondust, enemies afflicted by Moonfire are slow by 30%, which is kind of nice. Elune's Grace, using Wild Charge in Bear Form or Moonkin Form, encourages a 3-second shorter cooldown, so grants you a bit of mobility or a slow on the enemy. So nice utility choices tied together in a single node. Further down, we have Arcane Affinity or Choice of Lunation. With Arcane Affinity, all arcane damage from your spells and abilities is increased by 3%, which on its own I think maybe could be good. For Lunation, balanced druids gain their arcane abilities reduce the cooldown of Fury of Elune by 2 seconds, and the cooldown of New Moon, Half Moon, and Full Moon by 1 second. But for Guardian, arcane abilities will reduce the cooldown of Lunar Beam by 3 seconds. So there's a way for you to get some of these abilities back, so you can utilize more of this like arcane style of play. Towards the bottom, we have the Eternal Moon, which is the capstone trait where it further increases the boundless moonlight. For balance, Full Moon, New Moon, and Half Moon also call down 1 minor moon. For Guardian, Lunar Beam increases mastery by additional 8%, deals 30% increased damage, and lasts 3 seconds longer. And for both specs, Fury of Elune, the flash of energy now generates 6 astral power or 6 rage, and its damage is increased by 50%, which is actually quite strong altogether. For the most part, they didn't really adjust the Elune's Chosen tree since their reveal in BlizzCon, but they did adjust it numerically a little bit, so it's almost like they're doing tuning right now for this thing instead of just completely overhauling or restructuring. But I kind of like the themes of the arcane side of things. I feel like this fits really well for Balanced Druid, but I'm not quite sure if this will fit super well for Guardian. I like some of the changes to how Thrash becomes an arcane ability and how maybe Guardians will be able to utilize Fury of Elune more regularly as part of the basic rotation as through procs or something, but I do wonder if they will eventually move Fury of Elune into the Guardian talent tree also, because I think that would maybe help complete this whole Elune's Chosen playstyle. Up next, we have the Druid Wildstalker hero trait, which is going to be shared between Feral and Restoration Druids, and is going to encompass a little bit of damage output, but also a little bit of healing and self-survivability increase. Starting out, we have the Thriving Growth ability, which for Feral Druids or Cat form Druids will allow Rip and Rake damage have a chance to cause Bloodseeker Vines to grow on their victim, dealing bleed damage over 6 seconds. Whereas Wild Growth, Rejuve, and Efflorescence has a chance to cause a Symbiotic Bloom to grow on the target, healing them over 6 seconds. And multiple of these instances can overlap. This allows for Feral Druids and Restoration Druids to utilize these both offensively and defensively, even if you're mostly a DPS spec Feral or a healing spec Restoration. So imagine this will be really good for M+ Restoration if anything. Right hand side simply buffs the effectiveness of your damage abilities as well as your healing abilities. Further down, we have a choice node with Bond of Nature or Harmonious Constitution. With Bond, healing you receive is increased by 10%. With Constitution, your regrowth healing on yourself is increased by 50%, so survivability options. Further down, we have a little bit new ways to augment the Bloodseeker Vines and Blooms. With Twin Sprouts, when vines or blooms grow, they have a 10% chance to cause another growth of the same type to immediately grow on a valid nearby target, so lets it spread across multiple enemies. Or Implant. Feral Frenzy immediately causes a Bloodseeker Vine to grow on the target, while casting Regrowth is made instant via Nature's Swiftness, causes Symbiotic Bloom to instantly grow on the target, so more ways to control the main trait of this hero talent. Then we have Strategic Infusion. Target's Fury and attack it from Prowl will increase your chance to shred, crit, and Brutal Slash to critically strike by 8%. Whereas casting Regrowth increases your chance to for your periodic kills to critically heal by 10% for 6 seconds. So that's actually kind of interesting here, the whole crit play style. Then we have a choice node to mostly facilitate your way to escape danger as a druid. With Entangling Vortex, enemies pulled into Ursals are also rooted, which makes it that much harder for them to escape the druids when you do get caught in that Ursal. Damage may cancel the root effect. Or Flower Walk. During Barkskin, your movement speed is increased by 10%, and every second flowers grow beneath your feet that heal up to 3 nearby injured allies, which could also be kind of nice. Further down, we have Bursting Growth. When Bloodseeker Thorns, I think it's supposed to be vines, expire, they explode into thorns, dealing physical damage to nearby enemies. Damage is reduced above 5 targets. When Symbiotic Blooms expire, flowers grow around their target, healing them and up to 3 nearby allies, so a way to turn that ability into somewhat of an AoE kit as well. Left hand side will increase the damage and the healing of your character while you're in cat form by 5%, whereas Moonfire and Sunfire damage is increased by 10%, which is just a way to buff the output of either spec. With Wildstalker's Presence, Wild Growth and Rake last 20% longer, which is just a nice little buff to bleeds as well as the healing over time effect. Then we have a choice node of Resilient Flourishing, with Bloodseeker Vines and Symbiotic Blooms lasting for 2 additional seconds. When a target afflicted by Bloodseeker Vines dies, the vines jump to a nearby target, refreshing the remaining duration. Or you have Root Network, where each Bloodseeker Vine increases the damage your abilities deal by 2%. And each Symbiotic Bloom increases the healing of your Life Bloom and Wild Growth by 2%, which seems like a way for you to either augment your blooms and vines to either buff your playstyle or to be able to much easily spread to a nearby enemy, like in Mythic Plus situations or such. Then we have the capstone of Vigorous Creepers. Bloodseeker Vines increase the damage your abilities deal to affected enemies by 10%, which is a significant damage gain, as long as you can spread Bloodseeker Vines to all the other targets. While Symbiotic Blooms will increase the healing your spells will do to afflicted targets by 8%. Overall, this seems like a very simple hero talent that mostly applies a passive effect, but does reward good play as a Feral Druid or as a Resto, but doesn't necessarily have like a hook, an ability, a specific way to interact with these thorns and blooms. Rather, just playing your character will allow you to naturally interact with them, and as long as I guess you can maintain the vines as well as the blooms on multiple allies and multiple enemy targets, then I imagine this could be a nice hybrid playstyle that maybe will have a lot more utility in things like Mythic Plus for restoration, or in PvP like arenas and battlegrounds for Feral Druids. Up next we have the Evoker Scalecommander hero spec, which is going to be shared between Augmentation and Devastation Evokers. Starting out, we have Mass Eruption or Mass Disintegrate. For Augmentation, Empower abilities cause the next Eruption to strike up to 3 targets. When striking less than 3 targets, eruption damage is increased by 25% for each target missing, so more single target or cleave capability, which I think is going to be great for Devastation, which is going to allow your empowerment abilities to allow your next Disintegrate to cleave to 3 targets. When striking less than that, you'll do more damage. This will actually be really strong for Dev because of the cleave capability. This makes your Disintegrate ability from empowerment spells even stronger than before, and I think it's going to be a very powerful toolkit just with the way the current Devastation is designed. Right hand side gives you Onslaught. Entering combat will grant you a charge of Burnout, causing next Living Flame ability to be cast instantly. Further down we have Unrelenting Siege. For each second you are in combat, Azure Strikes and Living Flames will deal 1% increased damage up to 50%, which is kind of incredible. But I guess you have to be in combat for 50 seconds, so in a long-term raid, this will be really strong. I imagine this could be really cheesed out in Mythic Plus, because you could place a training dummy potentially inside of an instance, and as long as you can hit the training dummy, or really anything that sticks you into combat, this could give Devastation and Augmentation Evokers quite a bit of additional damage throughout an encounter. Then we have further down Nimble Flyer. While hovering, damage taken from area effect attacks is reduced by 10%, which is going to be huge for survivability. With Tailwinds, Deep Breath, and Breath of Eons will reset the cooldown of Hover, which grants you more mobility. Down the middle row we have Bombardments. Mass Disintegrate and Mass Eruption marks your primary target for destruction for the next 10 seconds. You and your allies have a chance to trigger Bombardment when attacking marked targets, dealing volcanic damage split amongst enemy players. That's kind of interesting. This kind of ties the whole Scalecommander. You're marking enemy targets as almost like the leader of your party, and then your party is rewarded for attacking the same targets that you just recently marked. Kind of like the idea behind it. Wing Leader. Bombardments reduce the cooldown of Deep Breath and Breath of Eons by 1 second for each target struck up to 5, so up to 3 seconds. So this actually gives you more of a reason as to why your allies should target the enemies that you just marked, especially if you're Augmentation, so your allies can get more of that Breath of Eons goodness. Further down we have a choice node. Extended Battle. Essence abilities extend bombardments by 1 second, or Diverted Power. Bombardments have a chance to generate Essence Burst. So either way for you to generate resources to deal more damage, or you're trying to extend the bombardments a little bit further just to get more value out of the ability, which also could be kind of interesting. Then on the left hand side, we have Might of the Black Dragonflight. Black spells deal 10% increased damage. There's a limited amount of abilities that actually count as the Black Dragonflight spells, like Deep Breath for Devastation Evoker specifically is a Black Dragonflight spell, but I think Breath of Eons might actually be a bronze ability. It's going to be interesting to see which abilities you actually have access to and which aspect they fall into, but for some Evoker specs, this actually might be not a bad combo. Then we have Melt Armor. Deep Breath and Breath of Eons cause enemies to take 20% increased damage from bombardments and essence abilities for 20 seconds. So that's actually, again, ties back into the bombardment playstyle and using Deep Breath and Breath of Eons. Further down, we have a choice node with Hardened Scales. Obsidian Scales reduce damage taken by additional 5%, or Menacing Presence. Knocking an enemy up or backwards reduces their damage done to you by 15%. That could be actually really strong in PvP or even in Mythic Plus situations against huge groups of enemy mobs, especially as a devastation when you pop your cooldowns and you inadvertently draw attention to yourself, which happens almost often. But for the most part, I've seen the choice nodes are either utility, defense, or a little bit of damage, but for the most part, a lot of the raw damage is stacked up in their actual non-choice talents, which is interesting. Your final trait is maneuverability. Deep Breath and Breath of Eons can now be steered in your desired direction. That could be kind of awesome, especially if you can get yourself a long deep breath and then turn it last second. In addition, Deep Breath and Breath of Eons burn the target's volcanic damage over 12 seconds. This could be an interesting one. Overall, I get what they're trying to go with Scalecommander. I think that Mass Disintegrate and Marking is going to be interesting in group content. But this one overall, while it is kind of interesting and unique, I think this one is also pretty straightforward in terms of just a basic hero talent that increases your overall output. And I feel like you're definitely going to feel this on Devastation, less than Augmentation, since Aug is mostly about buffing your allies, but it will still be a noticeable damage increase. Up next, we have Herald of the Sun, and we actually have two hero talents to look at for Paladins. Herald of the Sun will be shared between Holy and Retribution Paladins, which starts you out with the ability called Sunspot. Holy Prism for Holy causes you next to Holy Power spending abilities to create a Sunspot on your target, dealing radiant damage or healing over 8 seconds. For Retribution, Wake of Ashes causes you next to Holy Power spending abilities to create a Sunspot on target, dealing radiant damage, but basically the same thing as Holy then. Both specializations, 10% of Sunspots damage and healing radiates to nearby allies or enemies reduced beyond 5 targets. So there's a bit of an AoE component, but also a bit more of that single target component as well. Interesting. Right hand side has us starting off with Luminosity, which is going to, for Holy, critical strike chance of Hammer of Wrath and Divine Storm is increased by 10%. I think it's actually supposed to be reversed. I think for Holy, it's supposed to be a critical strike chance of Holy Shock, and Light of Dawn is increased by 10%. And for Red, it's supposed to be a critical strike chance of Hammer, Wrath, and Divine Storm increased by 10. So hopefully they'll have it adjusted. Further down, we have Sun Seer. For Holy, Holy Shock and Light of Dawn criticals, which is going to be buffed up by the earlier talent, cause the target to burn for additional radiant damage over 4 seconds or be healed over 4 seconds. For Retribution, Hammer, Wrath, and Divine Storm crits cause the target to also burn for additional 4 seconds. Then we have Second Sunrise. Holy Shock and Light of Dawn have a 50% chance to cast again at 30% effectiveness, where for Retribution, Hammer, Wrath, and Divine Storm have a 50% chance to also be cast at 30% effectiveness. Down the middle row, we have Eternal Flame. 3 Holy Power ability, where you heal an ally immediately and over additional 20 seconds, and healing is increased by 25% when cast on self. So this is an ability that actually existed, I believe, back in Warlords Regener. I need to go back and check, but I'm pretty sure this was added in WoD. It replaced your Word of Glory, and so it doesn't heal exactly, and it basically turns Word of Glory into a instant heal with the healing over time afterwards. But it's actually kind of interesting that it's been given again. I guess it fits the whole Herald of the Sun, and you have this Eternal Flame to keep you alive. This definitely is an increase for Holy Paladin, and I guess a survivability increase for Red, because it doesn't really have any combat benefits for them. Further down, we have Eternal Sun. Sunspot's duration is increased by 2 seconds, and Eternal Flame's duration is increased by 3 seconds, or Lingering Radiance. Sunspots leave an Eternal Flame for 12 seconds on allies or a greater judgment on enemies when they expire or are extended, so that could be good for Red as well. Further down, we have Solar Grace. Your haste is increased by 4% for 12 seconds each time you apply a Sunspot. Multiple stacks may overlap, so that could be good too. Left hand side, Morning Star. Every 5 seconds, your next Sunspot damage or healing is increased by 5%, stacking up to 10 times, so this could be good in longer combat encounters. Gleaming Rays. While Sunspot is active, your Holy Power spenders deal 10% increased additional damage or healing, which could also be good in some of the shorter encounters. Further down, we have Illuminate. Sunspots reduce the movement speed of enemies by 50% and increases the movement speed of allies by 20%. Or Will of the Dawn. Movement speed flat out is increased by 5% while above 80% health. And when your health is depleted below 35%, your movement speed is increased by 40% for 5 seconds, which grants paladins that much needed and much sought after mobility. Further down, we got Aurora. For Holy, after you cast Holy Prism, you gain Divine Purpose. And for Retribution, after you cast Wake of Ashes, you gain Divine Purpose also. And the capstone trait is going to be Sun's Avatar. During Avenging Wrath, you become linked to your sunspots. causing radiant damage between you and the enemies or healing allies that pass through the beams, reduced beyond 5 targets. Activating Avenging Wrath applies 4 sunspots onto nearby allies or enemies, increases sunspots damage and healing by 20%. So this is kind of where they tie it together. You use the primary ability to spread sunspots, you pop wings, create these chains, and you can either AoE enemies down or heal allies nearby. For Retribution, I imagine this will be incredibly good in content like Mythic Plus. For Holy, since their Avenging Wrath is a 2-minute cooldown rather than a 1-minute, it will still feel pretty good to use, but I think Retribution will definitely get a lot more value out of it. But I guess it's a trade-off for running Eternal Flame, which is going to be pretty huge for Holy Paladins in terms of spreading healing over time on multiple allies, but for rest that's mostly just a defensive. But this is where a lot of the core playstyle is going to run out of, is in Sun's avatar and being able to chain light to multiple targets afflicted by sunspots. And further down we have yet another Paladin hero talent called Templar for protection and retribution. Templar is going to function a little bit differently, starting off with the ability called Light's Guidance. For protection, Eye of Tyr is replaced with a Hammer of Light for 12 seconds after it is cast. For Retribution, Wake of Ashes is replaced by a Hammer of Light after it is cast, and Hammer of Light calls down a hammer onto your target with the power of the light, dealing holy damage to the target and up to 4 nearby enemies. Additionally, it calls down Empyrean hammers from the sky to strike 3 nearby targets for holy damage, costs 5 holy power. So if you're able to combo into Wake of Ashes, Hammer of Light, or Eye of Tyr, Hammer of Light, there can be quite a bit of additional damage overall, but it is a holy power spender. Right hand side has us play into Empyrean Hammer. When Empyrean Hammer critical strikes, 60% of its damage is dealt to nearby enemies. Enemies hit by this effect deal 5% reduced damage to you for 8 seconds, so it's more of an aggressive but also defensive hero talent from what I can understand. On the right hand side further down we have Bonds of Fellowship. You receive 20% less damage from Blessing of Sacrifice, and each time its target takes damage, you gain movement speed up to a maximum of 40%. Or Unrelenting Charger. Divine Seed lasts 2 seconds longer and increases your movement speed by additional 30% for the first 3 seconds, so overall, more mobility for Retribution and Protection Paladins. Undisputed Ruling. Hammer of Light applies Judgment to its targets and increases your haste by 15% for 6 seconds. For protection, additionally, Eye of Tyr grants you 3 holy power, which makes this whole playstyle of calling down a Hammer of Light at the end of it a little bit easier. Further down the middle we have Shake the Heavens. After casting Hammer of Light, you call down an Empyrean Hammer on a nearby target every 2 seconds for 8 seconds, so that could also be pretty good. Higher Calling. For protection, Crusader Strike, Hammer of Wrath, and Judgment extend the duration of Shake the Heavens by 1 second, and same thing for Retribution through Crusader Strike, Hammer of Wrath, and Bladed Justice. Further down, Hammerfall. Protection, Shield of the Righteous and Word of Glory call down Empyrean Hammer on a nearby enemy. While Shake the Heavens is active, this effect calls down an additional Empyrean Hammer. For Retribution, that's going to be procced from Templar's Verdict and Divine Storm to call down an additional Empyrean Hammer. So very aggressive, very hammer-based playstyle, but very much a Templar, or at least what I would imagine a Templar to be. Left-hand side has another choice node with Templar's Watch. For protection, Hammer of Light and Eye of Tyr deal 30% increased damage when striking only one enemy. This amount reduced by 6 for each additional target struck, so there's a bit of like a cleave situation. For Retribution, Hammer of Light and Wake of Ashes deal also 30% additional damage. Gonna be amazing in PvP content, but it may be less good in Mythic Plus or certain specific raid fights. For Whom the Bell Tolls is another ability being added. That's another ability on choice node with Templar's Watch. Divine Toll grants up to 100% increased damage to your next 3 judgments when striking only one enemy. This amount is reduced by 20% for each additional target struck, so definitely much of a cleave situation, but both of these talents are tied around mostly single target rather than cleave damage, so it's really not a choice between cleave or single target, but rather which flavor of cleave, but mostly single target, would you prefer. So interesting choice. And then we have Sacrosanct Crusade. For protection, when you cast Eye of Tyr, you gain Shield of Vengeance for 10% effectiveness. For Retribution, when you cast Wake of Ashes, gain a Shield of Vengeance, so a bit more survivability there. Another choice node with Endless Wrath, calling down an Empyrean Hammer, has a 10% chance to reset the cooldown of Hammer of Wrath and make it usable on any target regardless of their health. Or Sanctification. Casting Judgment increases the damage of your Empyrean Hammer by 10% for 10 seconds. Multiple applications may overlap, so that could also be a really good one put together. And finally, the capstone choice to make the Templar work is Light's Deliverance. You get a stack of Light's Deliverance when you call down the Empyrean Hammer. At 50 stacks, casting Hammer of Light empowers you with 12 seconds to cast Hammer of Light an additional time for free. So definitely a very much hammer focused, hammer heavy playstyle for these paladins, a very aggressive tank or aggressive DPS playstyle that focuses on dealing as much damage as humanly possible, which I think fits the whole idea and the theme that is of a Templar. Up next, we have a weird one, which is a rogue trickster hero talent or hero spec that's available for Outlaw and Subtlety rogues, and this one is going to be very odd and different compared to, I think, what we've seen so far. The Unseen Blade will be the first ability you'll start with, where Feint will now grant you 2 combo points. And quickly, now Feint will quickly slash at target with an Unseen Blade, dealing damage to nearby enemies. Targets struck are now phased for 5 seconds. Phased enemies take 5% more damage from you and cannot parry your attacks, which is interesting because what's going to happen if you end up using Fate against a warrior in PvP who just pressed die by the sword, which is a 100% parry chance. But I guess it just makes you immune to parry for a little bit so you can break past their defenses, which is interesting. And from here, this hero talent really does end up building on itself, so it gets a little bit complicated at some point. First, on the right hand side, we have Flawless Form, where for Outlaw, Unseen Blade and Killing Spree grant 3% mastery for 5 seconds with multiple applications that may overlap. For Subtlety, it is Unseen Blade and Secret Technique, which grant mastery, multiple applications may also overlap. Further down, we have a choice between 1000 Cuts, where Slice and Dice grants 10% additional attack speed and gives you auto attacks a chance to trigger Unseen Blade. Or Flicker Strike, taking area damage while Feint is active, or dodging while evasion is active, triggers Unseen Blade, may only occur every 5 seconds. So it's a little bit of a way to proc more Unseen Blades, either through a passive or through active damage mitigation. Further down, we have Elaborate Twirl, increases the duration of Flawless Form by 2 additional seconds, which is the primary ability up here. In the middle row, we have Smoke or Mirrors. With Smoke, you take 5% reduced damage from phased targets, so 10% damage reduction as long as enemies are phased. Or Mirrors, where Feint reduces area damage taken by additional 10%, which can be amazing in raid situations. Devious Distractions. For Outlaw, Killing Spree causes the target to be phased for 5 seconds, while Subtlety grants Secret Technique to cause targets to be phased for 5 seconds. Further down, another choice node, Cloud Cover. Distract creates a cloud of smoke for 10 seconds, and its cooldown is increased to 90 seconds. Attacks from within the cloud afflict the target with phase for 5 seconds. Or no scruples. Finishing moves have a 10% increased chance to critical strike phase targets. So it's a choice of whether making Distract a cooldown that you could use to force targets to be phased, or a way for your finishers to get a little bit more crit against phase targets. So again, I told you, mechanically there's a lot going on here. On the left hand side, we have Surprising Strikes. Attacks that generate combo points deal 25% increased critical strike damage to phase targets, so it really does try to reinforce that you need to phase your enemy targets. You have So Tricky on the left hand side, and Don't Be Suspicious on the right hand side. So Tricky, Trickster Trade threat redirection duration is increased by up to an hour. So if you wanted just to place a Trickster Trade in a tank when you're doing Mythic Plus dungeons, you could just permanently transfer all of your threat to the tank by the sounds of it. Or Don't Be Suspicious. Blind and Shrouded Concealment have a 10% reduced cooldown, Pickpocket and Sap range increased by 10 yards, which is actually interesting. The flavor one at the bottom is kind of neat with Pickpocket and Sap, but I think Tricky might actually be a little bit better in PvE content. Further down, Nimble Flurry. For Outlaw, Killing Spree deals 10% more damage, and you have 10% reduced cooldown. For Subtlety, Secret Technique deals 10% more damage and have a 10% reduced cooldown. And the capstone trade is going to be Coup de Grace. I'm probably messing this up, but that's basically it. After 4 strikes of Unseen Blade, your next dispatch will be performed as a Coup de Grace, dealing 40% increased damage. If the primary target is phased, gain 5 stacks of Flawless Form. Or Subtlety. After 4 strikes with the Unseen Blade, your next Eviscerate or Black Powder will be performed as a Coup de Grace, dealing 40% increased damage. If the primary target is phased, gain 5 stacks of Flawless Form. So it's a playstyle that really doesn't make you want to phase your targets and incorporates the ability of Feint as a combat ability, even though usually that is a defensive. So that could put you in a situation where you want to use Feint as often as possible, but you may want to save maybe a charge of Feint for specific combat encounters, which is interesting. The AoE damage that Feint does to nearby enemies, if it does decent enough damage, it'll definitely make you want to press the ability quite often, but even then you're going to want to press it just for the phasing aspect. And there's a lot of ways to phase enemy targets and a lot of ways to make it so that enemies take additional damage from you, or you're more likely to crit them when they're phased. With the coup de grace at the very end of the day, really does encourage you to use Unseen Blade as much as possible, or get as many stacks of Unseen Blade as much as possible, in order to start attacking the targets that are phased, in order to get Flawless Form, in order to get Mastery, and it really makes you play into Killing Spree and Secret Technique heavily. It's a very interesting playstyle that adds a lot of mechanical things in between your basic rotation, and I think this is kind of interesting setup. I am still unsure about phase, a defensive becoming an offensive ability. Whenever Blizzard does this, that's usually a weird one, and a lot of players in the community have a hard time adjusting to it, and I imagine I also would probably have a weird time adjusting to it. It's just a weird situation to be placed in where you kind of want to use Feign defensively, but also you could use it just to get a better parse and damage. And I feel like when you create that kind of like conflict of interest, maybe that's not the best way to go, but I kind of get what they were trying to go with Trickster. Up next, we have the Diabolist hero spec for Warlocks, with Destruction and Demonology getting access to the Diabolist. First ability you get is a Diabolic Ritual. Spending a soul shard grants you Diabolic Ritual for 20 seconds. While Diabolical Ritual is active, each soul shard spend reduces their duration by 1 second. When Diabolic Ritual expires, you gain Demonic Art, causing the next ability that costs a soul shard to summon an Overlord, Mother of Chaos, or a Pit Lord that unleashes a devastating attack at your enemies. So this is a summoner playstyle that you cannot pick up as a Destruction Warlock, which is kind of cool. For Demonology, this fits, but for Destruction, oh, this could be awesome. I like this. So this actually basically has that flavor of summoning demons, but now you can have it as Destro, so that's kind of cool. On the right hand side, we have Secrets of the Coven. Mother of Chaos empowers the next Shadow, Bolt, or Incinerate to become a demonic barrage, which allows you to channel. And Demonic Barrage allows you to channel a barrage of 4 Shadow Bolts at 150% effectiveness towards the enemy target over 1.5 seconds, which is kind of interesting to say the least. Then we have a choice node with Infernal Vitality. Unending Resolve heals you for 30% of your maximum health. That's actually quite strong, because especially with how tanky Warlocks are and how good healing is on them and how they have more health than most classes, that's actually a very solid heal over 10 seconds. Or Infernal Bulwark. Unending Resolve grants you Soul Leech equal to 10% of your maximum health, and increases your maximum amount of Soul Leech you can absorb by 10% for 8 seconds, so a bit more of a passive way, while the other is an active healing ability. Further down we have Gloom of Nethreza. Is that how you say it? Nethreza? For Demonology, Hand of Gul'dan deals 50% more damage for each soul shard spent. Where Destruction, enemies marked by a Havoc take 5% increased damage from a single target spells. Wait, enemies marked by a Havoc take 5% increased damage? Does that mean you not want to use Havoc as a single target ability? Or is it like just to implore more cleave capability? Either way, we'll find out in the future. Touch of Rancora. Diabolic Ritual increases the damage of your next ability that costs soul shards by 30% and reduces its caster by 50%, which could be really bursty for Destruction in the long term. Then we have a choice node, Cruelty of Curzon. Curzon, is that how you say it? Nether Portal, summon Demonic Tyrant, and Summon Infernal grant Diabolic Ritual and reduces duration by 3 seconds. Or Infernal Machine. Your soul shard spending abilities decrease the duration of Diabolic Ritual by 1 additional second while your Demonic Tyrant, Nether Portal, or Infernal are active. So a bit more ways to play or add your cooldowns into the base rotations. Abyssal Domination. Grimoire, Felguard, and Cataclysm gain additional effects. Interesting. For Grimoire Felguard, it will last 3 seconds longer, and its cooldown is reduced by 30 seconds, which actually would make Felguard, Grimoire Summon Felguard, even stronger. But for Destruction, casting Cataclysm summons an Overfiend that casts Chaos Bolts 2 times at 80% effectiveness before departing. Again, another way to summon up yet another demon into the core. Love it. Cloven Souls. Enemies damaged by your Overlord have their souls cloven, increasing damage taken by unipeds by 10% for 20 seconds. A nice little buff. Soul Edge Circles. You always get the benefit of Soul Burn when casting Demonic Circle Teleport, increasing your movement speed by 50%, making you immune to snares and roots. That could be nice for escapes. Or Annihilon Below. The Howl of Terror cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds and range increased by 5, so another way to escape your enemy targets. Flames of Zoroath is a choice down further. Fire damage increased by 2%, damage dealt by demons increased by 2%, so nice little buff, but nothing crazy. And the final capstone choice will be Ruination. Summoning a Pit Lord causes your next Hand of Gul'dan or Chaos Bolt to become Ruination. Ruination calls down a demon-infested meteor from the depths of the twisting nether, dealing chaos damage on impact to all enemies within 8 yards of the target, and summons 3 wild imps. So you have already Secrets of the Coven with the Mother of Chaos, you have yourself the Overlord, and you have the Pit Lord, and how they add augmentations to some of your abilities as part of this Diabolist playstyle. I'm a big fan of Destruction, getting access to summonable demons. For Demonology, I feel like that kind of just fits their MO, but for Destruction in particular and how they can alter and change the way your abilities work, I find that to be a very exciting playstyle. And I actually cannot wait to see this one and see what these demons look like, because I feel like gameplay-wise, this one could be kind of interesting, because unless you can tell which demon you're going to summon next, there could be a little bit of chance of randomness to this one, which some players would enjoy, but not everybody. I am interested to see how this one works out, and I'm hoping this works super well, and I hope this is actually a very strong choice, because to be able to summon demons as Destruction is something that I would want to see going forward. And finally, we have the Colossus Warrior, which is shared between arms and protection trees. The first ability is going to be Demolish, an active ability with a 45-second cooldown where you unleash a series of precise and powerful strikes against the targets and enemies within 8 yards. You can block, parry, and dodge while using this ability, which is going to be good for protection also. Right hand side is a choice node where Shockwave's stun duration is increased by 5 seconds. That's actually kind of good in AoE situations, and I believe Shockwave already has a 5-second stun in PvP. So I wonder if that means a 7-second stun in PvP, potentially. Or Earthquaker. Shockwave also knocks enemies into the air, and its cooldown is reduced by 5 seconds. That one could be really good. Also, depending on the encounter, like certain Mythic Plus fights. Another choice node is going to be found for the Below, with No Stranger to Pain. Total damage prevented by Ignore Pain is increased by 15%. Or Rally. Taking damage has a low chance to give you a second win for 2 seconds. That one actually could be really good, since second win healing is actually quite potent. Further down, we have Mountain of Muscles and Scars. You deal 5% more damage and take 5.2% less damage. Size increased by 5%. So basically a 5% versatility buff in a way, and also 5% size buff, which is also, I guess, going to be fun. Colossal Might. Mortal Strike and Chill Slam grant a stack of Colossal Might. Colossal Might increases the damage dealt by Demolish by 10% and stacks up to 5 times. Demolish consumes Colossal Might, so you'll want to use abilities, build up Colossal Might, and use Demolish to consume it. Tide of Battle further down, Colossal Might increases the damage of Overpower and Revenge by 2%. So while you're building up Colossal Might, you also want to use other abilities to benefit as much of the buff as possible until you eventually consume it. Further down, we have True Might. Mortal Strike and Chill Slam, critical strikes grant an additional stack of Colossal Might, which kind of just plays back into the Colossal Might playstyle. Left hand side, we have Martial Expert. Your critical strike damage is increased by 10%, and the amount of block by critical blocks is increased by 10, so a bit more of a crit damage interaction and crit value interaction for both. Then we have another choice node, One Against Many. Shockwave, Cleave, Whirlwind, and Revenge deal 5% more damage per target affected by up to 5. With Arterial Bleeding, which is another choice node, Colossal Might increases the damage of Rend and Deep Wounds by 2, so either a bleed buff or a basic AoE ability damage buff, which is kind of nice. Precise Strikes is found further down, with Mortal Strike and Chill Slam damage increased by 50%, which is pretty plain. And then a final choice node towards the bottom, Unstoppable Force. Colossal Might now stacks 10 times. If you would gain a stack of Colossal Might and you are at max, the cooldown of Demolish is then reduced by 2 seconds, so this is actually a good way to gain the ability back a little quicker. While channeling Demolish, you are grounded, making you immune to stuns and effects that move you. So Demolish is an active ability that channels. That is something they actually don't have in a tooltip right now. But that's gonna, I feel like that by itself is weird if you are just stuck in place, because recently a lot of Paladins, Warriors, and Death Knights found access through the Fairlath Legendary, since the buff is drop rate in Dragonflight, and that means that they're kind of stuck in place for a little bit while the Legendary is channeling. A lot of players ask for the channel to be shortened, or for you to be allowed to move while channeling the Legendary, because being stuck in place is just not super fun and kind of breaks the flow of all those classes. And this Demolish ability, it looks like it may just do that. It may just end up breaking a flow of your classes, as it gives you a channeling ability. For Arms Warriors, I think there's not always a case where you're kind of used to being stuck in place and channeling an ability, like with abilities such as Bladestorm. So there, it may not seem that weird, like Demolish and Bladestorm may feel about the same, except one grants mobility, the other doesn't. For protection, that could be awkward, because if you're stuck in place, and you can't really move, and there's a mobility heavy encounter, or you want to be more reactive, you may need to cancel Demolish then in order to move. That would make things a little bit weird to play into. I do hope they maybe can solve it, because if you're stuck in place, even if you're immune to stuns and such, I think being stuck in place, channeling an ability may not feel that great in the long term. But overall, I don't hate the rest of the talent tree. I just wonder if they'll end up changing up how Demolish works, because again, it doesn't say in tooltip that you're stuck in place in channeling, but based on this here, while channeling Demolish, you're grounded, making you immune to stuns and effects that move you. That may not play super well into the overall playstyle. That was a long one, but that was the full entire showcase of all of the different hero talents that have been announced as of this week's reset, with 8 additional trees fully revealed, or rather 7, since we already knew about the Elune's chosen playstyle for Guardian and Boomkin Druids. Overall, very excited about some of the ideas and concepts, and I'm glad that all of the hero talents are very different from one another. Some of them will add a brand new ability for you to use, others will give you a brand new mechanic, others will specifically change the way your cooldowns function, or even very basic abilities turning defensives into offensives, which is controversial, but could be good. I really want to see how they play and test all of these, and on paper we could read about them, talk about them, but I feel like we won't really get the feel for them until we get something that's like playable, until we get something that we can finally get our hands on. But for now, this is all we got when it comes to the newest hero talents released. What are your thoughts on them? Let me know in the comments down below. Any kind of feedback we give them right now can change them, alter them. Everything here is subject to change, so let me know which ones you like the most, what gameplay aspects you think sound good, and which ones you maybe like the least, and what would you like to be changed going forward. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video, or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.